Hey, I'm sitting here today on something I'm really excited about, a 1937 Harley-Davidson EL Knucklehead Sport Solo. This bike used to belong to John Parham from JMP Cycles. I knew John pretty well, and it belongs to another friend who owns it now. So I haven't seen it in years, so I'm happy to be reunited with it, but it doesn't want to start. So I'm going to go through a sequence of things that I do to make one of these things start really easy. But the Harley-Davidson Knucklehead was a special motorcycle. They introduced in 1936. Prior to the release of the Knucklehead, pretty much all the production motorcycles in America were flatheads, side valves. Horsepower is limited because of that. Harley-Davidson had been developing the Knucklehead to make more horsepower because it's overhead valve. By 1937, they still made a limited number, only 1,829 of these models. So they're really rare because not that many survived. But this is a survivor. It's a beautiful motorcycle. I'm excited to work on it. This is where your DNA from your Harley-Davidson Road Glide and Street Glide comes from. Right here, the overhead valve Knucklehead changed everything. I've been doing this my entire adult life, and since I'm closer to the end than I am to the beginning, that's a good long time. It's almost 40 years. It's always the same suspects with the Harley-Davidson V-twin, the reason they don't want to start. Any gasoline engine needs compression, spark, and fuel to run. The Harley-Davidson V-twin is no exception. So I kicked the motorcycle earlier, and it does have compression. So if it doesn't want to start, that tells me right away my problems are spark and gasoline. So those are the things I'm going to address here. I have a real simple way I do this. I kind of go through a mental checklist of one thing. I eliminate everything that could be a problem, and when I'm done, I usually start on the first kick every time. And that's the goal, to make it start first kick every time. So the first thing I'm going to check on the motorcycle is the battery. The battery is what gives it a spark and runs the lights. So almost every time I try and do something like this, the battery needs water or needs a charge or both. So I'm expecting both of those things for this. When I turn the switch on the dash, the ammeter tells me that there's current flowing, but the headlight's not working. So I'm going to assume the headlight's good and there's just not enough current to run it. So I'm going to go ahead and check the battery for water, put a charge on it, and once I do that, the headlight should come to life. So I'm just going to remove these two wing nuts, and they pull the battery cover off. And underneath the cover, naturally, you're going to find the battery. So this is a 6-volt battery with 3 cells. There's 2 volts in each cell. So I'm going to pull these caps and look down inside and see if there's water in there. Okay, the front and rear cells do have water in them, but they're low. In the middle cell, the plates are above the water. So I'm going to go ahead and add some distilled water to the battery. So I have a solo cup full of distilled water, and I just use a syringe and suck the water up into the syringe, and that's how I get the water into the battery. You don't want to overfill it. It will discharge it if you overfill it, but you just want to put enough to get it about a 1/4 inch over the top of the plates. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my 6-volt charger on and put the positive lead on and the negative lead on the negative terminal. And right away, just with putting water in it and putting the charger on it, it should start coming to life. As soon as I connect it, the current starts to show on the meter, which shows me that it really needed a charge. I just connected the battery charger and put the water in less than a minute ago. And right away, you can see that I've got current at the headlight. So my assumption was right, the headlight works. And it was just the battery was dead as a doornail. It's been cold outside. It's been in single digits here in Tennessee, which doesn't help any at all. And it's been sitting for a long time. So 30 minutes on the charger with water in the battery, we should be good to go. While the battery's charging, I'm going to go ahead and check the spark of the ignition timer, because that's what fires the spark plugs. This is a manual spark advance, and you advance and retard the timing through the left hand grip on the motorcycle handlebar. So when it moves clockwise, that's the retard motion, and when you move counterclockwise, that's the advanced timing motion. So the first thing I have to do here is remove this retaining clip. Once I get the clip off, I pull this cap off. And there's your ignition timer cap. Underneath the cap, you have your points condenser, your ignition breaker points, and the ignition breaker cam. And the cam spins clockwise when you're looking at it from the top when the engine's running, and then it opens and closes the points in this action right here. So as this cam is rolling around, your points are opening and closing like this. I'm going to turn the key switch on so there's current from the battery to the points, and I'm going to open and close the points and see if spark jumps across. There should be a spark arcing across the point contacts. And see, there's no spark there. So that usually tells me that the points are dirty. So let me show you how I clean the ignition point contacts. So I just take a little strip that I tear off of a sheet of 220 grit sandpaper and fold it in half. And then I peel the point contacts apart with my thumbnail. And I put that sandpaper in there. And I just sand a little circular motion to clean any corrosion that might have built up on the contacts, so that they have 2 clean surfaces for electrical contact to jump across. You can see on the sandpaper, there's like a little white residue on there. That's the corrosion that's on those point contacts. And I clean that off with the sandpaper, and I should have a good contact. So what we'll do now, I'll go ahead and turn the key on and check it again and see if I have an arc there. So now that I got my points clean and I have spark jumping across those contacts, I know there's fire there. I'm going to go back to the other side of the bike and check to make sure there's fire to the coil and to the spark plugs, because if I have spark here but none over there, it does me no good. Okay, pulling the plugs is going to tell me a couple things. The first thing it's going to tell me is if there's spark over here. And the second thing it tells me is I can just tell just by looking at the spark plug. This spark plug is black, which means the motorcycle is running rich. So that's something that's going to have to be addressed once I get it running. But this is also one of the most common things I find with these bikes is, and this is one of the reasons they became obsolete, is they're really hard to run and keep tuned. You have to be on top of it. It's not like you can just get on it every day, turn the key switch on, start it, and go. They constantly need attention that you don't give to a modern motorcycle. So your spark plug should be the color of coffee with cream if it's running right, and it's black, which means it's got way too much fuel. Now, if the spark plug was really white, you would know it's not getting enough fuel and it's very lean, which is even a worse condition. If it's lean, it'll burn the engine, it'll get hot and burn the engine up. If it's black and it just run like hell, use a lot of fuel, and cause you a lot of trouble, especially in traffic. So it should look like that cup of coffee. So I'm gonna, once I get done with everything, I'll adjust the carburetor and run it for a few miles. And when I pull the plugs back out, you'll see they'll be that color. And it'll be a lot more fun to ride, but I'm going to check for the spark right now. Okay, I'm going to ground the plug to the intake manifold, and as I peel the points apart, spark should jump across that spark plug. That's what you want. I got a gapping tool here. I'm going to go ahead and gap the spark plugs at about 35 thousandths of an inch. Front one has a little too much gap. I'll just knock that electrode down a little bit. Close the gap, and then I'll come back and re-expand it with the gapping tool. There you go. The good news about having black spark plugs is, generally speaking, if the plugs are black, it's because you're getting too much fuel, which means there's probably not an air intake leak, because an air intake leak will make it look lean. It doesn't always mean that, but it's usually a good sign when the plugs are dark, because that's easy to fix. If I have an air leak, that can be more difficult to fix. So all that gets me to the point that I know we have spark to the spark plugs. So we know we have compression. The next thing I'm going to check is the ignition timing, because if you have spark but it's not timed properly, the spark does you absolutely no good. Before I go ahead and work in the fuel situation, because I know I'm getting fuel because the spark plugs are black, so I'm actually getting too much fuel. The spark needs to be happening at the right time in the engine, and the spark timer that I showed you earlier is driven by gears inside the engine, so it's synchronized to the engine. So every time the flywheels go around and the pistons go up and down inside the V-twin engine, that timer is at the same spot every time. But you have to set where it sparks manually, and if it's not set right, it makes it hard to start, it'll make it run rough, it'll make it get bad fuel mileage, you know, a whole host of culprits will pop up on you if you don't have your timing set right. And this is one of the most common things I find on older motorcycles, on older Harley-Davidsons and Indians, is the fact that the timing is not set right. And I'm a stickler about getting it set right. And it's why I make them start so easy, because I get this thing on point every time. I'm going to show you how I do it. You want to time the spark to when the front cylinder is on its compression stroke. So I have to find that compression stroke. So without taking the engine apart, the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to pull these pushrod tube covers. These pushrod tube covers cover the push rods that actually open and close the valves. But when I pull these push rod tube covers off, I can look at the push rods and tell where the engine is in its rotation, if it's on the exhaust stroke or the compression stroke, because that's where I need to be. I'll pull these push rod tube covers off, go ahead and find out where I'm at. While I have them off, I'll adjust the push rods, because they probably haven't been adjusted in quite a while. Just looking at how the spark plugs are and the battery's dead, this thing's probably been neglected for service in some time. So I'll go ahead and do that while I have it apart, and then we know it's done and it's good for another 5,000 miles. There's just a little retaining clip in the top. It's got a spring-loaded collar, and I pull that tube up, and right underneath of it is the front exhaust push rod. And then this one back here is the rear exhaust push rod. And then this is the rear intake. Behind it, this is a Harley-Davidson EL, commonly known to everyone as the Knucklehead. And they call it Knucklehead because the rocker covers for the valve train kind of resemble a set of knuckles on your hand. This one's fighting me, but that's the rear intake. And then this one up here in the front is the front intake. Let me put my binoculars on so I can see what's happening. As I mentioned to you, I'm going to time this spark to the front cylinder compression stroke. So the way a 4-cycle engine works is the piston goes down and the intake valve opens, and that's your intake stroke, and it takes air and fuel in through the carburetor. Then the intake valve closes, and as the piston comes up, that's your compression stroke. Then right at the end of the compression stroke, all your air and fuel is compressed in the cylinder, your spark plug fires, which is what I'm doing now as I'm setting the timing at that point. And the explosion inside the cylinder is going to force the piston down, which is your expansion stroke or your power stroke. And as that piston goes around, it drives your flywheel drives your transmission and the chain, and the motorcycle goes down the road. And then that piston will come back up, and as it comes back up, the exhaust valve will open, and that's your exhaust stroke. Lets all the spent gases go out the exhaust pipe. And that's your 4 strokes, or your 4 cycles of a 4-stroke or 4-cycle engine. And then the whole cycle repeats and goes over and over again until you blow the engine up. My compression stroke is going to be right after the intake valve opens and closes. So as I roll the engine over, there goes my intake stroke. As that intake valve opens, and my exhaust valve just closed, which is the last cycle. So now my intake valve is going to close. And as that valve closes, that means I'm starting my compression stroke, which is where I told you I want to be on the front cylinder, because this is my front cylinder. On the side of the motorcycle, I'll pull the plug, and there's a mark on the flywheel that shows me exactly where that spark should be happening. And we'll go around and take a look at that now. This is the timing hole with the plug in it right now. I'm going to remove the plug, and then we'll find that mark on the flywheel so we can set the spark timing. Let me go get my coffee spoons. Inside this hole, you can see the side of the cast iron flywheel, and that flywheel is going to have a vertical line on it that will come around, and that's my front cylinder timing advance mark, and I'm going to roll it around so that that advanced timing mark comes into the window. I'm going to go ahead and jack the motorcycle up and get the rear wheel off of the table, because then I can throw it in gear and roll the wheel, and through the chains the wheel will roll the engine over while I'm on that side of the motorcycle, and I can get that flywheel with the mark in the view where I need it. All right, right now the wheel's rolling, I'm in neutral. So the wheel's rolling, but the engine is staying stationary. 1937, the Harley-Davidson was hand shift and a foot clutch, whereas a modern motorcycle has a hand clutch and a foot shift. Well, this was a hand shift and a foot clutch. So here's my shifter. So I'm just gonna roll the wheel a little bit and throw it into first gear. And now, you see I rock the wheel back and forth. The wheel won't roll freely anymore because it's engaged to the clutch, the primary chain, and the engine. So this is how I'm gonna roll the engine over. So I'm going to really lightly roll the wheel, and that will bump my flywheels around so I can see my mark. Let me check for the mark. All right, it's not there yet. Now you start to see that vertical line I mentioned to you on the flywheel. That's where the mark is now. I need to bump it up just a hair. I don't want it that far forward. I'll back it up a little bit. Now that I know I have the front cylinder on the compression stroke, and that mark is just coming into that hole on the right side of the hole, now I can go back to the timer on the other side and set it up so the spark is occurring at just the right time. So on my circuit breaker cam, there's a little notch. And that little notch should basically be in alignment with this follower here. This fiber points follower contacts the cam, and as the cam rolls around, the high lobe on the cam will open and close the ignition points. I need to set my spark at full advance. That right there is full retard. So as I come to full advance, my points should just start to be opening. But if you notice, these points opened way before I got to full advance. They're opening right there. And then you also have to take into account that there's gear lash inside the engine. And when I take up that gear lash, it really is opening too early. So they have the timing too advanced. And that's just not a good thing. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the timing just a hair so that it's right where it needs to be. And all I do is I loosen this little clamp here that clamps this ring around the timer and puts tension on it. And I'm going to roll the timer back a hair and tighten back up and check where my points are opening. Little things like this make all the difference in the world. Yeah, I'm rolling the cam and the timer right now, and if you don't check that, that's usually what will get you out of time. So I'm rolling it and taking the gear lash out of that cam that's going on inside the engine. That gear lash is opening the points for me. When the engine's running, it's going to be run full advance like that because of the direction of all the spinning. So if you don't check it, you're going to be off your timing because the points are closed, but they're actually open right there. So that's how I know I got my timing on point. So now I'm going to jump up on the stand for just a second and kick the engine over. And you can watch how this timer rolls over in slow motion, you know, because when the engine's running at, say, 750 RPM idling, it's pretty fast. But I'm gonna jump up here and kick it over. So I'm just gonna kick the engine over. And as I kick the engine over, you should be able to see the points open and close as the cam rotates, and you should be able to see the points spark. Oh man. Look what I did. I had the timer plug out and the bottom end is full of oil from sitting. So I've lubricated the fire extinguisher, the sink, and my key box, as well as some of my floor and the drywall. While I got this cover off, I'm gonna go ahead and check my points gap. I wanna clean the feeler gauge because if there's oil on it, the oil will get on the contacts on the points and then could keep them from sparking. So I check it. You usually want to be 16 to 20 thousandths on this. I'm at 20 right now. It's a little smaller than that. I'm going to go ahead and set it by loosening this screw right here. There we go. Beautiful. While I've got these pushrod tube covers loose, I'm going to go ahead and check the valve adjustment, because if one of these is tight or loose, it's going to make it run rough. It's going to wear the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and check real quick. And just the same principle, I'm going to go ahead and do the intake stroke on the front cylinder, and you want this pushrod to roll freely without having any up and down play. So this one's set right as I receive the motorcycle. It spins freely, but it's not too loose, and it's got oil on it, so if it was tight, my finger would be slipping. So that one, front intake is good. Front exhaust is too loose. Look at this. You see that up and down movement? Way too much. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the tappet at the bottom. There's a jam nut down there. Now loosen that jam nut and extend the tappet to take up the play in that pushrod. This thing probably loud as hell when it runs like that. I mean, sound like somebody's inside the engine with a hammer banging on the inside of the case trying to get out. 1/2 inch and 7/16. 1/2 inch, there we go. So I'm just extending the length of this tappet to take up the play in that pushrod. It's spinning, it's getting tighter, but it still has probably, you know, a 1/16 of an inch up and down play. So I need to get that out of there. And it's gonna make it run better. It's gonna save his engine from certain destruction. When you have the valves adjusted as loose as that one was, all that hammering and pounding that's going on inside the engine, this is a roller tappet that follows your cam that's right underneath that pushrod. And this is what pushes that tappet and that pushrod upside down. So here's a roller wheel. You know, it rolls on the cam, it's nice and smooth. And here's one that had been run out of adjustment in my chopper for too long. And you can see how it's knife edged, it's worn. The surface of it that follows the cam, it destroyed the cam. And what happens is when this happens, the bearings that are in there and all the metal off of this goes down in the bottom of your engine and gets picked up in your oil pump and usually wipes out the oil pump. All that metal goes through your engine and ruins. You know, this engine is probably $40,000 for this engine. So you could ruin a $40,000 engine by not having your valves adjusted right. So that's why you want to take the time, a few minutes that it takes, and set these, because if you don't, there's still play in that. You shouldn't hear that noise. That's that hammering noise. It's going to destroy something inside here. So I just got to keep adjusting until that play is tolerable. I've done a lot. There, now it's rolling and it's free, but there's not a lot of play. I'm going to tighten up just a little bit. There we go. And I'm just going to tighten this jam nut. This is the magic of knowing how to use your hands. And that jam nut wasn't tight. I never loosened it, and that's probably how it got out of adjustment in the first place. I put these clips back on the front cylinder, and I'll go address the ones on the rear cylinder, and hopefully they don't need quite as much attention. The same on the rear cylinder. I'm going to check my intake is good back there. So I'm going to go ahead and put that clip back in. Okay, now just check the rear exhaust. This one's good too. You check that, just make sure the jam nut's tight. Yeah, it is. All right, so just the front exhaust was the only one that was really going to be causing me any problems up here, but now we know. This is good for about 5,000 miles, and you show me 5,000 miles on that odometer, I'd be happy to see it, because most people don't ride bikes like this that much. I would, but you know, it's good for a good long time. So valves are adjusted, timing set, we got spark, we got compression. The last thing to check is the fuel system. You know, and I want to go over a few things. I'm going to check the oil. I'm going to check the engine oil while I have it here. Check the gearbox oil. And check the tire pressure. And then I'd put a nice stack of money on it. Whoever's out there got their own stack that I can start it in one kick. And it's, what, 20 degrees outside today? So we'll give it that one kick test and see if I can get the fire up in one kick. While I'm here and I'm on this side and I got my 1-inch wrench out that I was using on the flat jack, I'm going to go ahead and check the transmission fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the plug. You know, these old motorcycles are so funny. Like if you read the manual, it's like, look in the plug, and if you can see oil in there, you're okay. You know, it doesn't tell you like there's no dipstick, there's no nothing. It's just like, make sure there's oil in it. Yep, it does have oil in it. You can see down in there. It's good, clean oil, and it's a good level. It's up on the bearing. That's your clutch throwout bearing that's moving in and out there, but you can see the fluids up on the bearing, and that's kind of the visual you want for an old Harley-Davidson 4-speed gearbox. And this is called a heel-toe clutch, a heel-toe rocker clutch, and your heel goes here and your toe's here. And on Harley-Davidson, they call it toe-to-go. You push your toe down, and it engages the clutch. It makes the motorcycle propel itself. I think Indian's philosophy was on a clutch pedal in a car, you push the clutch pedal down to disengage the clutch. But Harley-Davidson, when you push it down, it actually engages the clutch. So it's a little reverse. And I think Indian was thinking more along the lines of, we're going to make it work the same way it would work in your car. So if you got out of your car, jump on your motorcycle, it'd be the same. I'm assuming that's the philosophy. But different between Harley-Davidson and Indian. But regardless, there it is. I purposely left these plugs black. You know, I could clean them. I left them black because I want to show you after a few miles of riding how the heat from the engine will burn that carbon off of them and change the color like we discussed. Okay, I'm going to check engine oil. It's on the tank here underneath the seat right in front of the battery. And you can see there is a dipstick on this, and it's full, which is a pleasant surprise. Anyhow, it's got engine oil, it's got transmission oil, gasoline next. I'm going to go ahead and put these battery caps back on just so no debris or anything gets in there. You know, there could be dirt up under the seat or something, and once I start it, the first thing I want to do is fall down inside that battery. You know, the wing nuts, what do they tell you, right? This is something you got to work on all the time. Like for ease of access, you got to be in here all the time. And that's how they came. So the wrap on this bike is, it was a running motorcycle, and it just all of a sudden became hard to start and didn't want to run. So I'm going to make some assumptions just like I did with the headlight. I'm going to assume that it has good gas in it and it has good gas flow to the carburetor. The black spark plugs certainly tell me that it's getting gas. So I'm going to kind of assume that everything's set right. I'm going to put some clean gas in it and just make sure that it's flowing. And then once I've done that, I'm going to try and run it. And if it runs like hell or is hard to start, then I'm going to go back and address some things with the carburetor. I know I have to adjust the carburetor, but I'm hoping I don't have to take it apart and work on it. Because if it was a good running bike, you shouldn't have to go do those things. Okay, so I got gas in the tank, and now I'm going to check down at the carburetor and the fuel strainer just to make sure there's fuel flowing to the carburetor. The fuel's on, so as I start to pull this cap, I should get some seepage. So the fact that there's no fuel coming out here tells me that there's no, the line is probably clogged, or the fuel valve is clogged, which is certainly just one more thing to cause problems. You know, we've got spark, we've got compression, we know that the spark is timed right, but there's no fuel to the carburetor. So, and that's probably why it was running black plugs. People try and self-diagnose problems not knowing what they're doing, and it probably had bad fuel flow through the fuel line. So what somebody did is try to adjust the carburetor to enrich in it trying to compensate for a problem in a way that doesn't really make sense. So I got to get that fuel flow problem fixed to the carburetor, and then we're ready to start. Let me put this back on before I forget, like I did with the other one, and fucking have oil shooting all over.
Oil on your wall.
Oh yeah. I pulled the bottom off the fuel strainer. It's basically your fuel filter where the fuel goes into the carburetor, and fuel should have dumped out of there. None did, so I started thinking maybe the fuel line's clogged. So I'm going to go back and break this line, and you see the fuel's dripping. So that means the line is not clogged, at least up to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the fuel off and take the strainer off and clean it out. There's something clogged in the strainer, and that's why no fuel dropped out the bottom. But it's starving fuel from the tank to the carburetor. That valve probably doesn't work. It's probably just going to continue to drop fuel. So I shut the fuel valve off, but that doesn't seem to be stopping the flow of fuel, which probably means that the valve doesn't work, which is pretty common. I'm trying quickly to get this strainer cleared so I can get it all back together and stop that fuel drip, because it's coming out at a pretty good pace. At least I know my fuel line's not clogged and I have good fuel delivery from the tank to the carburetor. It's just blockage right here. So, oh yeah, that's nonstop. All right. Okay, this is a gravity fuel system, so if I just bring this hose up above the level of fuel in the tank, mitigates my drip. There it goes, starting to drop because it was curved. Let me see if I can get it in there some way where it won't do that. There's 10 bucks. This must not have been blowing fuel. This is a good way to kill germs and bad breath. This piece of gasket came out of that strainer as I banged on it, so that's what was clogging it, keeping the fuel from going into the engine. Nothing like fuel in your lungs. And I just got to get this back in there and get the fuel line back on it and get it connected and dump this fuel back in, because I'm huffing these fumes, you know, I'm sitting right over them, and it's a lot. Not easy doing it with fuel running everywhere. It makes your hands slippery and cold, but I've done it 2 million times, so shouldn't be that big of a deal. Famous last words. My wife's gonna love this when I get home. Oh, there it is. That line was stuck between the fins on the cylinder. I was wondering what was going on. I had a guy that used to work for me that would be doing this with a cigarette hanging from his lips. He'd be like, dude, what are you doing? What, man? I'm like, man, couldn't wait. Okay. Is that all the gas I put in this sucker? It drained out? And most men get home and their wives are like, how was your day? Mine's always like, you stink. Go get in the shower. You stink. Parts cleaner and grease and oil. And
that's how men smell. That's how real men smell.
That's what I tell her. I can walk in the house in heels, smelling like a rose.
Smelling like the lunchroom in a 9 to 5.
Yeah. I told her, I go, when I come in stinky, that means we made money. And that means that kids can go to college. Okay, let me jump back up and see if I lost all that fuel. All right. Probably a good reason for it. There's some in there. Come on, shaky. No, boy. No. Gonna smell like aqua velva in here for a couple of days, but.
At least you're right over there.
Yeah.
You're gonna spill it somewhere.
Yeah. You know, there's really nothing else I need to check, but, you know, because I don't need to check the tire pressure to start it, but I know once I start it, I'm going to want to ride it. So I'm going to check the tire pressure on it, and I can push it outside and show you the little starting technique, and then see if I win that bet or lose that bet. At 15 pounds of air, 14 pounds of air in the back, in the front. The back's probably not much better. The back's got 20, and that's good for a rigid frame because there's no suspension back here. So that 20 pounds of air, you want to run a little low to give you some cushion, but the front should have 35 pounds. And let's see how good I am. I'm going to try and put 20 pounds of air in it. So let's see if I can get it on the first try. All right. Above 30, let me look and see. It was pretty damn close. Let's see. No good. I was at like 29 pounds, so I was off by about 6 pounds. That's 40. I'll take a little bit out of there. All right, 35, we're good. I'm gonna go ahead and put the timer cap on just in case there's gas leaking. You know, that spark isn't right there, but I'll pull it off later when it's running so you can see the point sparking. Let me see if his brake light's working. Yep, that doesn't mean the brake works. It just means the light works. The brakes on these things are, I've always called the brakes on these press and pray. Redecorate somebody's trunk when you're riding too close behind them. Get all this stuff off of here. I'm gonna take it down, take it outside, and see if I'm good at this. All right, bye, mirror. All right, so I feel like I've got everything done on the 1937 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead to where it should start on the first kick. I haven't run it yet. It's cold. It's in the 20s or 30s out here today. I'm not sure what it's warmed up to yet, but you can see these exhaust pipes are cold. They'd be burning my skin if there was any heat at all in them. There's absolutely no heat in them, so that's how you know that it's a cold engine. And I'm going to go through a couple little things you do on one to get it ready to start. And then fingers crossed, it'll start. Okay, what I'm going to show you isn't particular to this 1937 Knucklehead. If you have a pan head or a shovel head, a flat head, any old Harley-Davidson, even think something back to the teens and 20s, it's pretty much the same method to start it. You're going to want to choke the carburetor and give it a couple prime kicks with the ignition turned off. You just want to get the gas moving through the carburetor. The old Linkert carburetor that's on here is made out of bronze. They're really cold-blooded, so I'm going to show you how I do that. So I'm going to give it a couple, cold kicks, and then I'll retard the timing, turn the ignition on, and my magic should work itself out right here. So let me show you how I turn the choke on the Knucklehead. There's a lever here on the left side, and when it's up, the choke is off, and when you push it all the way down, the choke is on. Then it has a couple clicks here in the middle where you can run it with the partial choke. So I'm going to put the choke completely on. I'm going to open the throttle all the way, which is twisting the right hand grip. And with the ignition off, I'm going to give it 2 good kicks. That'll move a lot of fuel through there. Now I'm going to close the throttle and then open it back up just a hair, not even a quarter turn. I'm going to go back to the choke and close the choke halfway, which is a couple clicks here on this side of the carburetor. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to retard the timing by twisting the left hand grip. So I'm going to retard the timing like I showed you earlier, move that timer back. And now, the moment of truth, turn the switch on and see what happens when I kick it. And I've never ridden this motorcycle before, never tried to start it, other than just a few minutes ago. Not good. So now I'm going to choke it again. I don't know if you hear it running, but the reason it was hard to start is one of the spark plugs is fouled out and just isn't going to want to run. So I'm going to replace the spark plugs, go back through my sequence again, and that'll be a 1 kicker because you saw how easy I got it to start. That's so crazy, like an old bike like this, they've all been messed with, like this one has, see how this is a screw in that head? And that one doesn't. This is a 1937 head. This is a 38, 39 head. Only the 37s had that screw in it. So somebody probably broke a head somewhere along the way and changed it. They run the same, but it's just a little bit different. This is for a primer cup. They'd have a little cup there that you would screw out and you would squirt liquid gasoline into it to prime it in cold weather like this. So you wouldn't have to go through the sequence that I'm using to kickstart it. Then they eliminated that, 1938. Ready to rock. The pipes get hot right away, but the engine's still cold, the carburetor's still cold. So I run through my sequence real fast. Ignition off, prime it, throttle wide open, 2 prime kicks, shut the choke down some, turn the ignition on, make sure the timing's retarded, open the throttle a little bit. Cylinder head's broken. See the head moving? It's broken right here. You can see this knucklehead is moving. This piece of the head broke right here. It's very common in a knucklehead. The terminology among old bike guys is they call this a diving board because it looks like a diving board when the head's off the bike, but it's broken and it needs to be fixed. So the tanks have to come off the bike, the cylinder head has to come off, you have to take all this knuckle head casting off, all the rocker arms and everything, and it needs to be brazed with a torch, oxygen acetylene torch, and a brass rod. You can't ride it like this because if I ride it, I don't think the back one is broken yet. So here's the rear diving board, and that one's not broken yet, but if you continue to run it and ride it like this, it will break. You know, that's a $2,000 head, and you're just gonna cause damage to it. So there's no sense in trying to ride it that way, because I really wanna ride this thing. To do all this work and not be able to ride it is kind of crazy. But I am gonna give myself a little reward, and I'm gonna start it by hand, because I got it like that. So here goes. You get it down so you feel the compression stroke on the rear cylinder. So I hope you enjoyed watching me spend some time with this 1937 Knucklehead today. I mean, definitely the highlight of my day, the highlight of my week. Nice and cold out here in Tennessee, but you know, to get a bike like this that, you know, probably has spent more of its life sitting than it has on the highway. It's really a lot of fun to spend some time with it, have a relationship with it, and get it to a point where somebody else can enjoy it, because this motorcycle was made to enjoy. I mean, anything I work on, I feel like I'm related to them in some way. So special day for me today. And this motorcycle has the same DNA and everything I showed you, you know, adjusting the carburetor, adjusting the timing, adjusting the valves, all those things you don't have to do on a modern motorcycle anymore because it's done for you automatically. But the flywheels, the rods, the way the engine functions, the DNA is here. The 45-degree V-twin from Harley-Davidson from 1911 to 2025 to today hasn't changed that much. It's just how we get the fuel and how we get the spark to happen. This is the granddaddy of it all, and I'm privileged to work on it.